Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. Welcome, Kadie. I'm so glad you joined me today.
Thanks so much, Holly. I'm glad to be here.
So I'm going to introduce you. Kadie King is a licensed professional counselor and co-founder of Rocktown Counseling, practicing in Harrisburg, Virginia. Kadie works with children with a variety of needs, families, and individuals on the autism spectrum. She works from attachment and strength-based models and is currently exploring geek therapy and working towards certification as a pet therapy team with her therapy cat in training, Waffles. I love that. That's fantastic. And so Waffles may be joining us at some point today.
Yes.
At home, she's a wife to husband of almost 15 years, a mom to a 12-year-old son on the spectrum, and a cat mom. She considers herself to be neurodiverse with diagnosis of ADHD and undiagnosed but very present challenges with sensory processing. So, Kadie, you've got such a neat experience to share with us because you are not only experiencing the world in maybe a way where neurotypical people don't quite understand, but you're also a therapist.
Yes. And that has been such an interesting adventure. And in my training to become a therapist, that has been so validating of my experience, which I did not understand growing up.
Yes, and I'm so glad that we're going to be talking about this because again, this is coming from your own experience because we understand differently wired children that we often hear about these sensory sensitivities, and we need to talk more about this topic and how children experience their environment in this different way, because I've had so many patients over 23 years of me working with them, then telling me about these sensory sensitivities and how they're struggling and people don't quite understand. They're suffering in these environments and they feel like they either can't tell or they try to explain these differences, but their differences have been minimized by others. And it's just time for us to talk more about this. And so, of course, our audience is parents, therapists, and educators. So this is a great opportunity to talk more about these needs. So when did you first kind of notice your own sensory sensitivities?
So I do remember as a child being a very anxious child, and I always felt out of touch with my body. Like I'm not a coordinated human ever in my life. I have a really hard time kind of knowing where my body is in space. I'm horrible at things like Zumba. If I have to watch how someone is moving their body and match it, like forget about it, like something's getting broken. I broke my foot walking in the winter of 2020, like walking down a half step landing outside of my house, which I have walked down for 5 years.
Oh no.
So yes, that has been a huge struggle. And that's something that I did notice. And I always just kind of labeled myself as like, oh, I'm just really clumsy. I'm a really clumsy person. But thinking about it over the past several days, some memories have kind of come up of some things that I did that now I'm like, somebody who would have like come onto the scene without any information would think like, well, that was weird. One example is when I would do my homework and do my reading in elementary school and like early middle school, I I realized that I felt really comfortable and I felt contained and felt like I could focus when I was in my room. My bed was pushed up against the wall, so I would move the mattress out about a foot and kind of squeeze myself between the mattress and the wall, and then I would just sit there and read my stuff, like just laying there. And now that I think about it, I'm like, that's not something most kids probably do.
So you would squeeze yourself in there.
Yes, yes. And now I realize that was a need for like deep pressure, and that helped me to have the sensory input to know kind of where I was. Um, and it was also just kind of soothing, and in that state I could focus on what I was reading. Otherwise it's really challenging to focus on things.
Well, I would imagine because the expectation typically would be you have to sit in class, sit on a chair, or even during homework, right? Sit on a chair at a table and be expected to focus that way.
Yes.
Okay. I am not a person. I'm not neurodivergent. I am kind of a, what you would say neurotypical, I guess. Um, and I've experienced some, and a lot of people don't know this about me. So I'm putting it all out there, Kadie.
Okay. Great.
I don't have intense sensory sensitivities. So I don't experience that in the same way. I do have a little bit of experience, however. I remember being younger, and if the sides of the top of my socks weren't perfectly folded in
Mhm.
to my shoes, I would cry and just kick them off. Like I just could not wear shoes
Mhm.
unless they were perfectly folded. It was so uncomfortable. It felt like there were rocks in my shoes. And, I knew that was different. I saw other kids just be able to put their shoes on.
Mhm.
Like it was no problem. And, I remember thinking, like, I just don't understand this. I had a hard time explaining how, uncomfortable it was. And also, this is another thing. I really hate to have wet clothing. When I was younger, if I even spilled a little water, I would just have to rip my clothes off.
Mhm.
And that's not, considered okay in society. So, I had to really be careful and have a change of clothes and all of those things. So again, I don't know what that is to have intense sensory differences, but in my little tiny bit of experience, I
Mhm.
remember it feeling horrible.
Yes.
Not being able to concentrate on anything else except that feeling.
Yes. Yes. I Yes, that sounds like that sounds like something that I've definitely experienced. The piece with the socks being on right, or if they get turned around in your shoe while you're wearing it, like game over. I'm done for the day.
Game over.
um, yeah, and then I have to take them off, take off the shoes, take off the socks, put the socks back on, and the shoes back on, and yeah, it,
So someone who again wouldn't have an experience that way would be really hard to understand that. And in some ways, I would imagine minimize that. And what makes it even harder, this time expectation. So then, what if your socks weren't on correctly, or what if your shoes didn't feel right, but you had to get out the door?
yeah. Yeah, that's such a struggle. And I've thought a lot about that, especially with the kids that I work with, and with some of the adults that I work with as well. Like I have I have learned like ways to cope with that and manage that, and kind of hold on until like, okay, I just have to get to the office, and once I'm at the office, like I can take care of that. It's on my mind the whole time. I'm not 100% focused on anything else. Um, but I've been able to learn how to hold on to that uncomfortable feeling a little bit. But um, for kids with sensory needs, it, if they are feeling so uncomfortable in their body, it's creating this anxiety. And I'll go into kind of some of the ways that I experience anxiety in my body. I'll go into that a little bit later. But if that's on at 100%, you can't focus on the instruction. You can't focus on what the person beside you is talking about, or even your best friend talking about something that you want to hear about, um, because your body is just in this uncomfortable state, and it feels like it's never going to end.
Right. And I think I'm so glad that you brought that up, right? Because it wouldn't, and that's why again, why we're talking about this today is having people be more understanding, sort of shining the light on this topic. Because how do you have all these expectations of someone who can't even hear you because of the discomfort they're experiencing? So, Kadie, do you mind talking about some of the sensory sensitivities that you personally experience?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Uh, so in preparing for this, I kind of sat down and I just wrote down the five senses, and I was like, all right, what are the examples that I experience? And I noticed that the the ones that I had the most examples for were touch and texture, um, and sound. Um, and then I realized that there were some things that didn't fit neatly into any of the five like typical senses that we use, and so I categorize those as other or spatial senses, if that makes sense.
It does make sense.
um, yeah, and so I had a couple of those as well. But as far as touch, oh my gosh, okay, I'm gonna have to take some deep breaths like as I go, because even imagining them sometimes is is bothering me. I have a little rubber band fidget that I'm working with here too.
Whatever works for you, Kadie.
um, all right, so if my feet feel itchy or hot, even if there's not something in my environment that would make them feel that way, sometimes they just start to feel that way. Um, I I s- um, I start to get this feeling um, of anxiety, and at at a 3-4 of anxiety, um, it feels a little like I have to get up and move around, right? Like sitting still um, feels very difficult. And at a 10, um, I've described this, and I described this to my son, uh, who is 12. I asked him for permission to discuss these things as well, because I also want for him to always be able to advocate for who knows what information about him. And he was like, yeah, that's fine, that sounds cool, mom. uh, but I described it to my son. He had a meltdown the other day, and um, I was like, "Do you ever get a feeling kind of in your spine?" He's like, "Yeah, it feels weird and it feels just wrong, and like there isn't anything wrong." Um, but the only way that I can think to describe it is an itchy, like electric energy um, in my spine. And if you think about like when you get like a shiver or like a chill, it kind of has that type of movement, but I don't know how else to describe it. I'm sure some people are scratching their head like, what do you mean itchy electricity in your spine?
I think you're doing a great job explaining it.
That is but that's the best description that I have. And that feels like impending doom. emotionally, and that gets my, my cognitive distortions rolling, and it's like, all right, if you don't get out of this situation, like something's gonna happen, um, yeah, something bad's gonna happen, something is gonna explode, or you might shout out loud at people that you don't intend to, express anger towards. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of the range of the emotional piece of it, right? And the physiological piece of it. Um,
I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I think you did an excellent job, by the way. I know well, I don't know, but I'm sure it probably feels like sometimes there aren't words to describe it.
yes.
Um, but I think you did a great job and, really giving people an understanding of what that might be like and how shocking, I would imagine,
Yeah.
to your body, yet supposed to keep going, with whatever is happening at that moment.
Yes. How am I supposed to find what I need to put in my bag to take to work when I have an electric, itchy feeling in my spine that keeps kind of jolting me?
Exactly.
um, yeah, yeah. If someone were constantly touching an electrical socket and getting, little zaps, like you're probably going to pay attention to that and not like the task at hand. Um, I don't recommend touching electrical sockets.
Yeah, an additional disclaimer,
Yes.
right? We don't do that.
You have a lot of disclaimers in my work. I'm like,
Exactly, like, just don't do it. Even if you wanna know what it feels like, don't do it.
the other day, I literally said to a teen, "What if you didn't?" Just
Oh my goodness.
but
So, yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, we'll just don't do that.
yes.
So, when I'm curious,
Mhm.
is when did you start to sort of notice that maybe your experience was different than your peers?
Mhm. The first the first thing that I remember in noticing that there was something different was I remember how adults responded to me. And they, I would get like fussed at or, come on, Kadie, get it. Like, let's go. We have to go. We're going to be late. And I'm sure to them it looked like stalling. Um, but now I realize that it was sensory related, and I was just considered an odd child by the adults that were in my life. I observed I observed things and noticed details and things that others didn't really notice. Um, and then when I pointed them out, people were put off, I guess. And they weren't particularly like inappropriate things. They were just, why do you care about that? Um, and and so things like if a towel looks like it's going to be really soft and you touch it and it's actually scratchy, reality has deceived me. and, and physically, my body's doing that itchy electrical thing, and I can't control that. And yeah, it might look like I'm stalling to get my towel and get dried off at the swimming pool and get in the car so we can go to the next thing. Um, but the feeling to me just stops me in my tracks and makes me feel like I have to move to get away from it. So I'm just kind of stuck in it. But I think I first realized that it was kind of different from my peers in high school and then in college. In high school, I started just kind of noticing those things of an example, like the itchy towel, right? Or let me see. Yeah, if clothing didn't feel right, I was in marching band, and those uniforms were hot. They were so hot, and they were polyester, and they were very thick. And we would often be out at parades and things, and just the sensory input from that alone was a lot. And I started realizing, like, how does everybody else manage this? And I'm like, what, do they not? Is this not happening for them? Like, and I couldn't really put it into words then, but in college I was able to, and I think I just lucked out with like the most amazing friends ever, um, who were like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm sorry you feel that way. Like it was just very validating, and I don't think I had ever had a group of people that like really listened to one another and like accepted each other's experiences. But I would say in college is probably when I first noticed the difference, and um, and could start to name it.
What would that have been like for you? I mean, I'm so thankful that you had those friends, those true friends
Mhm.
that you can tell anything to.
Yeah.
So, what's really neat about this talk, too, is that hopefully, as a result of it, children are going to be able to have that support much earlier.
Yes.
And, again, thank you for that opportunity because I feel like people, the way you're describing it just makes so much sense. And that, those who are listening, those parents, those educators, those therapists
Mhm.
that support this population are going to be more open and understanding in how to support a child.
Mhm.
And sometimes I'll talk to young adults who still haven't had that experience where they haven't had that group or that other person that they can just be open with
Mhm.
about how they're feeling. So, do you felt like in not until college that you were able to kind of voice those the way you're experiencing the world?
Yes. In high school, I started to notice that it was different. Um, but in college is when I was able to create a vocabulary around it, language around it. And that was also key with that friend group is we we had a common language that we agreed on about different things. So if there was something that really bothered one person, we would have sometimes it would be an inside joke or something, and we would mention it and we would know, oh, so and so's having a hard time with this, or they just noticed that that person walked in the room. And we just kind of developed a shared and understood language of kind of what was going on, and and so in that way I felt like I could communicate with others about what was going on.
Oh, that's wonderful. And again, I'm so glad that you found those your people,
Yes.
right? Because we always talk about that. It's so important to find your people.
Mhm.
Um, so you are a therapist, obviously. You also have a child on the spectrum. I do as well. And it's interesting again to, even though I don't understand quite how it feels, to experience what my child experiences. Um, he has, and again, he gives me permission
Mhm.
to share. And I'm glad that you brought that up earlier because I think it's important to have their permission. And if they don't feel comfortable, then absolutely do not,
Mhm.
talk about their experience because we want to have them feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So he often talks about his experience with smell,
Mm.
and that can be really hard because a lot of smells are out there. And, often I won't notice something. And for him, it feels really bad. And so, when he tells me that, because I want him to be able to let me know,
Mhm.
so we can figure out how to make that environment more comfortable for him.
Mhm.
And really wanting, encouraging children to tell us what they need
Yes.
instead of that's not a big deal, it's not that bad, and then sort of minimizing that experience.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I think this is why this, podcast episode and Autism ADHD TV episode is so important because we can do things differently. We can do things better.
Mhm.
So, what advice would you give, parents, educators, and therapists when it comes to supporting children with these different sensory needs?
All right. I wrote out like a dissertation on this just now.
I love it. Let's hear it.
I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll definitely highlight a lot of the points. So the first thing that I would say, and just kept coming to mind as I was considering this in preparing for this interview, was be curious. Be curious about your child. Be curious about their experience. Um, every behavior that you see has a need behind it. Um, and and by being curious, you can help to identify what the need is. Um, a lot of times we're working on things like communication skills. And one of the pieces to communication is to be able to identify what you need to communicate. And when it comes to sensory needs, that can be so challenging. It took me until college. It took me until I was an older teenager and in my early 20s to be able to do that. Um, and so helping them to understand what they're feeling. Um, but first, you have to help them to kind of settle and calm and co-regulate. I'm putting on my therapist hat with the big words now. Uh, so we have to teach children to co-regulate with us. Um, and then they need a language about what's going on. And that's where being curious is going to come in, because as a parent, as an educator or a therapist, um, you're going to ask some questions. For example, if someone had asked me, if someone had noticed, like the example at the pool, if someone had noticed and said, is there, you don't seem to like that towel. Is there something about the towel that you don't like? I probably would have been like, of course, yes, it's the towel. And I don't like the way it feels. And it feels really rough and it hurts my skin. If someone had asked me that, I think it would have triggered some insight for me. Um, and yeah, so I think kids need that. Okay, I have a question. Am I allowed to mention um, like popular culture things that are licensed, as long as we give the disclaimer we don't own anything?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also wanted to say too, I'm so glad that you brought up curiosity because I believe when we're curious, we can open up everything. And also, it helps I think a parent, a professional, or educator to regulate themselves where we don't automatically default to this child's avoiding to give me a hard time or, these things that we may default to.
Mhm.
But really stopping and being curious and wondering
Yes.
what's happening. So, yes. All
Yes.
right, go for it.
Because like 99% of the time, kids don't have a malicious intent in
Right, right.
their maybe there's a time that they're really upset with their sibling and they're going to push each other, hit each other, but there's still a need behind it somewhere.
Exactly.
Okay, so we mentioned geek therapy. I'm exploring that. I am like ridiculously excited that exists. I'm doing a weekend workshop in April on that. I'm super excited. I'm a huge Marvel MCU fan, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If if you are trying to like trip me up on a question, just don't like. We have so many debates at our house between my son, my husband, and I. We're all huge just comic book fans and superhero fans, fantasy and whatnot. But my absolute favorite superhero is Spider-Man. The reason that I love Spider-Man is not that he is Spider-Man; it's that he is Peter Parker. He is this real life like kid who has like a really difficult like backstory of like loss and grief, and has just such a great heart. um and then he gets bit by this radioactive spider. He turns into Spider-Man. There are all these new things. He's also like an early teenager, so he's also still going through, puberty and adolescence, and he's already like, what is my body doing, right? But now like there's radioactive spider DNA, like what is that doing? It's just um it's just such a crazy experience. And what I love about him is like watching the watching the character of Peter Parker deal with things day to day. In Captain America Civil War, there's a scene where Tony Stark, Iron Man, comes in and is like, hey, nice to meet you, Peter. I know you're Spider-Man. And he's like, what? No, no, I'm not. That's not me. That's they can make that up on the internet. You found that on the internet. That's made up. Right? And Tony Stark is like, yeah, I don't think so. Um, and then I just realized that in this scene, Tony Stark starts to get curious when he sees the spider suit, and he's like, what is up with these goggles, man? Like, can you even see through these? And then Peter says, yeah, I can see through them. It's ever since, what is it? Ever since whatever happened. It's like my senses are dialed to 11 and there's just too much input. And so they just kind of help me focus. And like, oh my gosh, like when I heard that the first time, I was like, Spider-Man gets it. He understands like the world is too much. And he's found ways to cope with these sensory processing challenges. Like his senses are dialed up to 11, and that's how I feel a lot of the time. Like I've been distracted the entire time, but because I can hear probably a dozen different things happening um, within 10 feet of me right now. My senses are dialed up to 11. I've learned to kind of push through and ignore some of those. But it's hard, and it's a lot of emotional and mental energy. Um, but yeah, I love how Marvel, who I don't own any part of, and I'm not affiliated with. I just love them. I'm a super fan. I love how they get the humanity, and how they normalize that experience. Oh my goodness, like how many kids are now, how many kids that are on the spectrum or have sensory processing issues that are not necessarily falling under ADHD or autism. Um, how many kids can watch that and be Spider-Man knows what that's like, oh man, like maybe I can be successful too. Like maybe I can be cool too. Um, so I love it.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because that would be maybe, and again, a creative
Yes.
way, right? A curious way to express that, help a child express that difference.
Yes.
Ah, so good. All right, what's next?
Um, Looking through my notes. I just got so excited about Spider-Man,
Yes, I'm excited about Spider-Man. I never thought of it that way before.
and Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. I mean, if anybody wants to challenge me on Facebook about that, that's fine. We'll talk. We can talk. I'll be professional. Uh, um, yeah, for educators and therapists, consider your space. Consider what's in your space, what kinds of sensory distractions there might be. You want to have you want to have some tactile things. You want to have um, some tools in your toolbox to go to help kids learn to soothe or to use for activities and things. Um, but if you have them all setting out and visible, or you have all your aromatherapy stuff out, like it's probably going to overwhelm the child. But either overwhelm them and they become overstimulated and shut down, or overstimulated and excited, like just very busy, a lot of movement. And we can work with those situations, absolutely, but that's something that we can consider. Consider your environment and make changes accordingly. It doesn't mean you can't have those things in your room, but maybe you have a rolly cart that you pull out. You pull out materials as you need, and you put away others, so it's not as overwhelming. I like to do a lot of tactile stuff with the kids that I work with, or I did before we had the need for such strict social distancing. Right now, I'm doing all telehealth, but I hope that we will get to a turning point soon, and I hope that I'll be able to see my kids in person, because I really miss those. I really miss those moments where we're making glitter calm down jars, or we're making slime. I know a lot of people have some feelings about slime. Uh,
Parents have some strong feelings about
and so for the parents and the therapists and educators, the rule in my office is we can absolutely make this slime and we can try some different slimes. It is up to the adult that drove you here or is bringing you home to decide if it's coming home or if it's staying in my office until next time. Because I don't want to put the parents in that situation.
That's a good idea.
So, yeah,
I love that. Yeah, and you mentioned, and I just thought of this real quick, that there was one patient in particular I'm thinking of, and I had this diffuser where it was calm. It was called Calm, and he said, "What is that? That is horrible." I'm like, "This is not calming for you."
yeah.
And I don't have, after that one experience, I don't have anything in my office unless that person either tries it out, well, sniffs it and said, "I like this, I'd like more of this," or, we don't even go that. I don't wear perfume. I don't. So, I mean, I also think I'm really sensitive just because my son
Mhm.
is, and I want to be respectful of that. But as far as noises, as far as what lighting that child prefers, I mean, these environmental things that they really matter. And again, that's why I think it's so important for us to have this conversation. Um, so, Kadie, you have given us so much helpful information, and I'm so thankful that you joined me today. And I know that people are watchers and listeners, they are going to want to talk to you, and whether that's about Spider-Man debates or other sensory questions.
Bring those two.
I'm with you now. Spider-Man's my favorite. You totally convinced me. So how would they get in touch with you?
Sure. So my business website is rocktowncounseling.com. So you can reach me there. I believe there is a contact us link, and if you can mention that that you want to talk to me because you heard this podcast or this video, if you can mention that in there, that'll help. That'll help the person that does my admin kind of sorting to be like, oh, okay, send this along to Kadie to check in with somebody. You can also reach me on Facebook. I Right now I just have my personal page up. You should be able to find me pretty easily. My name is spelled with a D, and there are not too many KDs out there, but Kadie King, Kadie, and so you can send me a private message there, and we can chat from there. You can also send me an email. My email is kadie@rocktowncounseling.com. We tried to make it all as simple as and kind of cohesive as possible with our social media and such. But yeah,
Thank you for being so generous to give out your email too. Thank you for that. Okay, well, again, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll be talking soon. I'd love for you to come back in and talk with us again.
Absolutely. This was fantastic, Holly. I love this. This is great.
Great. Kadie, I'll be in touch soon.
All right. Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.